Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining in the space today. Thank you so much for whatever brought you here. My name is Carly Brown and I'm a yoga educator based out of Canada, and I'm sharing with you today what is yoga. And this might seem like a really basic concept. Of course, everyone has some sort of idea in their mind about what yoga is, but perhaps we don't really know what yoga is because it's been so diluted and convoluted in the Western world. I've been teaching for like about 15 years now, and I start almost every single one of my workshops or teacher trainings with what is yoga. In fact, my yoga teacher training, we spent the first 7 hours kind of diving into really like what actually yoga is and how the process of yoga works to lead us to self-realization. The reason why I feel this needs to be talked about is because the teachings of yoga have been so diluted and convoluted, and everybody comes to their own ideas about what yoga is based on these little ways it's been shared with them. So, for example, if I had a group of 15 people, each person might have their own idea of what yoga is. And yoga in the West now is just so consumerized, I guess you could say. Like, there's yoga for headaches, there's yoga for wrinkles, there's yoga for XYZ, and so people are a little bit confused. And whenever I'm traveling and I say, oh, I'm a yoga teacher, people will be like, oh, you must be so flexible, or oh, I could never do yoga, like I have such a monkey mind, I could never calm myself down enough to do those practices. And though they're not necessarily wrong in the context that they're thinking of and coming from, I'm always like, wow, the limited view of what they actually know of yoga to be is sad to me, because it is such a vast, deep spiritual wisdom tradition that I have so much reverence for, that it makes me sad that the world is really confused about what yoga is. So I always start my talks this way, just kind of giving a fundamental understanding of what we're working with here and the potential these practices carry for us, and the bigger picture. So let's talk about where yoga comes from. I think most people understand that yoga comes from South Asia, specifically India, and it dates back to 3,000 years old. There's so many different varying philosophies of yoga. I think a lot of people get stuck in thinking there's only one philosophy of yoga, especially Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which is often what is taught. But there's so many diverse teachings on the subject of yoga that have stemmed from different time periods and different regions. And what I especially love about these teachings is it's almost as if the great rishis and masters were so smart in understanding human nature that there's so many different ways and different paths for specific personality types. So for example, there's yogic paths that are specifically designed for people who are like of a devotional, emotional nature. There's specific paths for those of an intellectual nature. There's specific paths for people like you and I, who are just busy householders, maybe have children, have families, have jobs and bills to pay. There's a path for them as well. And so it's kind of like they say, there's many paths up that lead up to the same mountain peak. And I love that about yoga because it's so inclusive, and it's still getting you to the same powerful place of self-realization, but through a different pathway. Modern yoga has really fixated on two things. One being kind of like a path to wellness. So again, like I mentioned, yoga for headaches, or yoga for back pain, or yoga for menopause, whatever it is, which are all lovely things and helpful in this world. And I have nothing against these things. In fact, I teach many of these things as well. But it's not the end goal. So modern yoga really focuses on wellness and also like how to do yoga. So all about the techniques and the tools and the do this top three things for peace of mind, and top three things for low back pain, XYZ. So that's one way where the modern yoga is focusing and fixating, whereas traditional yoga focuses on yoga as a path not to wellness, but to self-inquiry into the nature of our soul and who we are. So it deals with those bigger picture questions like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What is the point of all of this? And comes to a conclusion, and we'll get to that. Whereas, modern yoga focuses on the how, traditional yoga focuses on the why. Why do we do yoga? So why do we practice? And why were these practices created in the first place? I mentioned all the various philosophies and all the various teachings that have stemmed from all these different regions and different time frames. They all shared a common thread. And like I said about the mountain paths leading up to the same mountain, that common thread was to find lasting happiness, that true meaning and purpose in our lives, and lasting happiness and peace that is permanent. Not, oh, I'm happy today and sad tomorrow. We all experience that in our day-to-day life outside ourselves. We all know that we live in a duality, and some days there's going to be good days, some days there's going to be bad days. The yogis were like, how can we get out of this flip-flop nature of sometimes good, sometimes bad, and how do we find that permanent peace that we're all longing for? So in the search of, we want happiness, well, what prevents us from being in that permanent state of happiness? And they discovered that, well, it is suffering. So sorry, I've got my teacher training manual here, some notes. So why, they were contemplating this question of why do we suffer, and how do we go about permanently removing the cause of suffering? So what I love about just this question in general is we know that the yogic tools that were then created and that these ancient rishis have mastered in order to know their soul came from that compassionate place of wanting to help people remove suffering from their life. So whenever I'm teaching, I always remind myself of this purpose. I'm not here to make money as a yoga teacher. I mean, obviously I have to earn a living, so there is a piece of that. But I try to remind myself the true essence of yoga, that I am with a student in any capacity to help them alleviate suffering within themselves and to see their own true nature. And it's really not about me, it's about them and their own relationship to themselves, and how can I facilitate that? So these ancient yogis said, okay, we want to figure out why we're not in a constant state of happiness, why do we keep fluctuating, and we want to know why we suffer. And so in Sankhya Krikya, the first verse, has this idea of 3 ways in which we suffer. It's called the threefold suffering, or dukkhatraya abhigata. So the first one is adhyatmic. So this is suffering that happens internally. We all can relate to this. It's the suffering where, we're our own problem. So I always think of that Taylor Swift song. It's like, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me. But how often are we self-sabotaging, criticizing, judging, calling ourselves down? And so these are the self-generated suffering that occurs. The second one is adibhotic. It's the suffering that's caused by external influences of others. So of course, like someone might say something to you, or rub you the wrong way, or steal from you, or do something to you, and of course that creates suffering in our lives. And then the third one is adidevic, and it's like the suffering that's way beyond our realm of control. Things like mudslides or earthquakes or natural disasters of any kind, or the pandemic, for example. Like no one really saw that coming, and no one could really do anything about it. So these are the 3 ways in which we suffer. And then so yogis were like, okay, well, how do we come out of this suffering? And so they went within, they self-realized, and then they decided to share these teachings with us. And in order to really understand these teachings, we have to look through their kind of lens to gain insight into yoga and Indian philosophical thought. So we have to sort of acknowledge some certain fundamental premises that enable us to look at the yoga philosophy with clarity. So the way my guru always says to understand yoga axioms, it's sort of like various sciences have their own ways of doing things. Like in mathematics, E equals mc squared. So you would, like, it's universally accepted that that's the way to do that version of math. I'm sorry, I do not know anything about math, as maybe you could tell. So it's just a lens that we need to kind of consider and look through when we're talking about these philosophies. So one is that our true nature is Atman, or limitless and eternal. Okay, so this is very, very important. So our true nature is limitless and eternal. And what are we doing on this path of yoga? Coming back to it. We're not really doing anything. We're just letting go of everything that's not and allowing it to just arise, because we already are it. Okay. That having a human birth is the best, like, body-mind complex in order to self-realize, and it is the reason why we're born. So I love this idea as well, that we have a great purpose just being here. Everyone is trying to seek purpose out in the external world, like, you know, I want to like leave a legacy and do this and do that, which is all amazing, wonderful things too. But just being born, you have such a great purpose to understand the nature of your own self. But as we know, probably being on a spiritual path, not everyone is interested in that like we are, and that's okay. Everyone ripens in their own time. Okay. Another one is that there is a need for a guru or a guide on our spiritual path to aid us in spiritual transformation. This, I feel, is very important to have teachers in our lives who can see things a little bit more clearly than we can and help explain and help teach us and guide us on our own path. Lastly, the belief that karma creates a cyclical nature of time and the transmigration of the soul, so that you know, when we pass away, the body is like the hardware, it goes, but the software, like our mind and all of our subtle samskaras and impressions, stay with us and carry on into the next lifetime. So taking in these above considerations, or these things we just mentioned, so I'm reading from my own textbook, the teachings of yoga show us that suffering stems from a lack of awareness regarding our true nature and our inherent divinity. Okay? So whenever we find ourselves out of alignment with our true self, that is when we are like open and susceptible to suffering in our lives. So a common example that we have of this that I've seen many times used is like a fish out of water. So a fish out of water is always going to be restless no matter what you give to that fish unless you put it back in the water. And the same goes with, you know, yogic spiritual thought, that, you know, our true nature is spiritual, and if we're out of that environment, we're going to always be restless no matter what. So the more we move towards our true self, our true nature, our spiritual nature, the more at peace we're going to be. And that is why sadhana, our spiritual practices that bring us back to ourselves, is so, so important. And, you know, sadhanas vary. They might be physical, it might be your asana practice, it might be your pranayama, your meditation. It doesn't matter what they are on the surface. It's how they bring us closer to our true self. Okay? Practices and the process that yoga offers from this is to help us move away from our avidya, which is our primal ignorance of not seeing ourselves as our truth. Okay, and then this creates, of course, all of the kleshas, but we won't go into that. So avidya is primal ignorance. It's like we've forgotten the truth of our being, and yoga helps us remember who we are. So the true self is within us already. We don't need to do anything to like get to it. We just need to remember it. We need to come back. Okay. And this is the fundamental reason why we experience suffering. So yoga is then understood as moksha shastra, so the science or system of fundamental liberation. And that is one way that I like to define it. It's a beautiful way to remind ourselves and others that, you know, the goal here is to liberate ourselves from these false identities that we've created in our mind of who we think we are, to move back to who we are. And yoga is defined in so many different ways as moksha, fundamental freedom, or like Patanjali says, yoga chitti vritti nirodha. So yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind, the modifications of the mind. It all points again back to the same thing. So when Patanjali is saying, you know, it comes from stopping the fluctuations of the mind, what I think of usually is like a pond. So you're looking into a pond. You want to see yourself clearly, but you can't see yourself because every ripple in front of you in the pond is distorting your image and not showing yourself clearly. And eventually when we seize the fluctuations of the mind, then we'll eventually be able to see ourselves clearly and sit with our true self. So there's many different ways of saying kind of the same thing. There's varying definitions that like actually don't even really say that at all, but the whole idea, whatever lens the definition is coming from, will take you ultimately to that goal of self-realization, moksha, fundamental liberation, and back to the truth of your being. So I know that this is a simple topic, what is yoga, but of course as we dissect it more, there is so much more to learn, and this is just the very, very beginning, and I hope to share some more videos like this just to go over yoga philosophy and help people gain a little bit more understanding into these beautiful, beautiful life-affirming teachings. Thank you.